on the bench, I have just the top of a Pentax MZ-3. I'm going to be repairing the pivot for the pop-up flash. It's a commonly broken part in these cameras, and when it goes, the flash won't pop up to its full height anymore, or it may not pop up at all. Here's a closer look at the area of concern. The coiled wire there is the spring that provides the tension to the pop-up flash. The end of that spring rides in a forked groove on the end of the pivot, and that fork has split. The repair requires a small amount of disassembly, but it's not too bad. I'll start by removing 4 screws in the front of the flash unit. These are kind of at odd angles, so I need to make sure that I have the driver at the correct angle for good engagement with the screw heads. The ones at the bottom are particularly annoying because there's no really good straight shot at them, and the heads are tiny. I always have to be really careful not to strip these. With the screws removed, the top cover lifts off easily. At this point, I can see the screw that holds the pivot in place, but I can't remove it yet. First, I need to get the latching mechanism out, the mechanism that holds the flash closed. It's basically one screw and a couple of metal stampings. There's also this one spring, and I need to make sure that doesn't fly away. Now I have access to the screw on the end of the pivot. It's a little awkward because everything wants to move as I turn it, but once I actually get my fingers around everything, I can unscrew it. And here is the failed part. Poor guy just couldn't stand up to that bully of a spring. Let's get in close and have a look at that failure. If I flip it around here, yeah, you can clearly see that there's only 1/2 of the fork left. On the right there is my replacement part. If you'd like to print one of your own, you can find the 3D model on the iFixit page, and I'll link that in the description. So for my other parts, I chose to go with brass for additional strength, which is certainly required in this case. But using brass would have some additional complications. I would need to tap new threads on the end of the post, and also get a new machine screw instead of the current self-tapping screw. Not impossible, but I wanted to keep the part as easy to use as possible. So instead I went with a 3D printed plastic part. And to solve the strength issue, I added holes at the end of the fork where I can drive a screw to tie the ends together and keep them from pulling apart. The extra screw can be taken from another broken MZ camera. Basically, any of the self-tapping screws that are about 4 millimeters in length will do the job. You can see with the screw installed how it forms a closed loop around the spring arm now, which is a much stronger geometry than the open-ended fork that was used on the original part. I do make one modification to the spring, which is to bend the end towards the base of the post. This will help the spring rest on its catch more securely. That'll make more sense in a minute. Now to install the new pivot in the flash. Even after doing several of these, it's always a struggle. The issue is that I have to partially load the spring in order to align the keyed pivot post to its hole. It helps to have the flash in the popped up position, but it doesn't completely remove the tension. And with the spring working against me, it's just really dang hard to keep a hold of this thing. I don't know, maybe I need grippier tweezers. Once I get it in there, I have to carefully place my finger on it without knocking it sideways. And if I hold everything just so, I can finally get that screw threaded into the end of the post. After the post is securely in place, I need to pull the end of the spring up onto a little ledge to get it fully tensioned. This is where that little extra bend helps out. Otherwise, it can easily slip off of this catch. Reassembling the latch mechanism is pretty straightforward. Again, finger on the spring to prevent flyaways. This camera also has a thin copper washer sandwiched in here, which I haven't seen before on other MZ-3s. In this case, I would guess that it's used to create a low friction interface, but it may also just be a shim. Maybe the latch had too much play when it was assembled in the factory, and the washer was added to take out the lash. Could be that too. I'll test the latch before putting the top cover on. Sometimes it needs a little bit of an adjustment if it doesn't close easily or release properly. And by adjustment, I mean bend the little metal pieces till it works. Sometimes you get a very precise eccentric screw to adjust a mechanism, and sometimes you just bend. And finally, I can put the top cover back on and get the screws in place. Again, being careful to keep these screws as straight as possible so I can prevent stripping. And that's it. I've now replaced all the parts that need attention in this camera. In the next video, I'll complete the reassembly and hopefully have a fully working camera. See you then.